really, Andrew is deeply committed to residential work, residents' rights, but more particularly transport, public transport, active transport, and looking for ways in which we can liberate our communities from the car industry, which has totally dominated the shape of our cities in the last, what was it, 80, 90 years?
Yeah.
80, 90 years in
100 years.
100 years. God, time gets away. And he's always had this deep interest, but I think, and we've I think many of us probably all met up in similar campaigns together. Westconnex, the campaign to stop Westconnex. Sadly, we lost. No, we haven't lost. I don't think we lost. We lost the first round perhaps. But I suspect that things are, the way things are developing, the climate change and everything else, we might have, I don't know, the last laugh may not be quite the right thing.
The last gasp.
But the chickens will come home to roost, and perhaps, we'll see another chapter to that particular struggle. But this particular presentation, I think, is something that is, it's kind of exploding. From a particular interest that Andrew took at looking back at a number of resident struggles to take back control of their streets in the inner city. And I think you started off with the Erskineville, the ones in Erskineville, didn't you?
Yeah.
And I remember Andrew took us on one of these walking tours, and it was very real because you could see the real gains that were made. And he started to research and he started to find the story of so many struggles that most people haven't heard about. And I think that they're great because these are struggles that have had wins. So I think, in recent times we put so much energy into campaigns and movements, and it can feel like we're always kind of working so hard and then losing. But residents have won, and but sadly the stories of these victories aren't told about enough. And I think this is a big contribution, to that process. I should say, Andrew and I are also running together for the Senate in the coming elections for Socialist Alliance. So
is there an election?
The election that everyone's been waiting for. So if you'd like to find out about it, there are a few flyers down here, and if you'd like to help in the campaign. We're outsiders in many ways, but we think we've got a message, not just a message of criticism to the major parties, and certainly that's legitimate, but we have a story to tell of a positive vision of a different sort of society based on solidarity, society based on people and communities taking back control of the environment they live in, and actually showing some of that respect for land and nature and community that the indigenous people of this land, have done for millennia. And it's the closing circle, isn't it? That's the message I'm going to put forward. Now Andrew will do a presentation, and then there'll be some time for discussion. The toilets are down there. There are refreshments here. We try to keep the movement during the presentation to a minimum. If you go quietly around the side, you can get a drink if you need one. There are a number of other events that are coming up, but I will tell you about them in between the presentation and the discussion. Now, I'd like to mention another thing. Apart from the election campaign, we're both heavily involved in Green Left. Green Left has been coming out since 1991. It's an extraordinary story of survival without big money behind it. But we try to do, as the name suggests, we try to tell the story and give voice to the many different voices that are not just concerned with social justice, but social justice and environment, and the combination of the two. So Andrew, all yours.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter, for the kind introduction, and I would also like to acknowledge that we're on Gadigal land, the Gadigal land of your nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And there's one section I do have here of horrendous destruction of Aboriginal heritage on the Newcastle Expressway, which is quite shocking and quite relevant to that as well. Road wars. I called it that just as a bit of a comment on like Mad Max sort of, the wars that we're having, but perhaps seems a bit catchy. So just a bit of what, who and why. So this is supposed to be like a people's history of collective action for human-centred streets in Sydney. Although for context, it's sometimes about individual action or about the opposition or things outside Sydney or about wider influences on and effects of that action where it seems relevant to the discussion. It started just to be about street closures in Erskineville, which I had an interest in, and broadened, and it's by far from complete, and many of the stories deserve their own or already have their own full treatments. I'm hoping perhaps that this could spark some interest, and maybe there might be a Road Wars website, or I've got a Facebook page where I'm uploading some things to be a repository for these in the future. So who am I? Yeah, as my name's Andrew Chuter. I've been living in Erskineville for 25 years, and I've raised my children there, and I like to be active in things and try to make the world a better place where I can. And being having young kids, it's like you can't always get out to protests and rallies and stuff. So I thought I'd just be involved in resident action and do things around my neighbourhood. And one of the first things I had a success was just getting this ramp installed. And actually it's quite hard to do something, get something like that done, but with the support of Sydney and Friends of Erskineville, I got it done. And so this was a new section being created that was a shared path, and a lot of people walk or have prams and come around here. It saves them having to go around some other bit and ride on the footpath or whatever. It just makes a bit of sense. And I moved on to bigger and better things. So I really got involved in the West Connects campaign. That sort of started around 2012. I came on in late 2014 and got really devoted and heavily into that. And this is an example of just of when Alvo came to what's it, Park in Rozelle? Eastern Park, and was trying to convince him. We were all trying to convince that was our campaign effort at that time, was to scrap the federal funds for West Connects. It seemed actually, if you go now and look at what happened in Glebe in the 70s, you realise that that's exactly what they did and made it stop. Yep. So we were barking up the right tree, I felt, but it was just a really tall, slippery tree. So sorry. I haven't time to happen. Let me just go back. I've got just a few more comments. Albo called me childish at that time. And after we started to realise that we were kind of failing, I spent a lot of time working on Erskineville campaigns. And probably the big success I had is getting working with the community and petitions and little actions to get a new entrance to Erskineville Station built and lifts built, and it's a really great shortcut now, and it brings the station effectively closer by 3 minutes walk for thousands of people in the south part of Erskineville. So I'm very proud of that. I just developed through that an interest in the in campaigning and stuff. So what finally tipped me over into doing this project was getting my hands only just a few months ago of some very rare footage. It was on a Betamax cassette from a lady I knew in Union Street, Erskineville. It copied just really well. Beat is good, better than VHS, right? And it copied really well. and this is what I found.
Sydney residents claim retiring local government minister Kevin Stewart has played a dirty trick on them in his final days in office. The minister yesterday ordered the City Council to tear down by Christmas a dozen trial road barriers at Erskineville, also Redfern, Newtown and Alexandria.
The artwork on the latest homemade road closure wasn't even dry when police moved in.
Move off, in your direction there, move on, off the road onto the footpath and stop obstructing the natural traffic.
Try and get him here to stop the hoons that are going down the streets at 100 miles an hour.
The move turned ugly as the tow truck operator dismantled the barricade and then drove off the wrong way on a one-way street.
Look him. We're for putting in road closures that we voted for, that are legal. We voted for them, we want them back. You should book that tow truck driver.
The residents say the road closures in the inner city area have been successful for the past year and a half, but their children's safety is now at risk because of political infighting.
It's been described as a favour, a last favour on retirement by Kevin Stewart to some of his old South Sydney ALP right-wing faction mates who've been wanting to have these roads open.
Ironically, Mr Stewart has declined to comment as he's no longer local government minister. His successor, Peter Anderson, won't comment either as he doesn't officially take over until the 31st of December. But although the residents have grudgingly accorded round one to the authorities, they're already planning their next illegal street closure. And sometime later this evening, possibly around 7:30, the street will again be closed to traffic. Kay Brown for 7 National News.
So, you got to stick around to the end to see the conclusion of all of that. But anyway, I hope that you kind of, you're the first people who have seen that publicly, that footage for 40 years. And this happened 40 years ago at the end of this year. We'll have a more bigger expose of that at the end of the year at Erskineville Town Hall, so please join in there. Yeah. So yeah, there was a number of street closures, and they've been installed on a trial basis to limit through traffic. And the City of Sydney was quite supportive, and they were removed on Christmas Eve, and suddenly removed by the state government. So that was just a bit of a taster, a bit of an introduction. Let's go back out here. I have got 199 slides in this presentation. It's far too long to cover it all, but I've put them into little chronological mini-stories that are relatively self-contained. And I just want to kind of hit some of the main beats, or maybe rush through some things in maybe half an hour or so, and then perhaps come back to this screen and you could go, look, you didn't go on this, I'd like to know more about that, have a bit of a discussion, and I could sort of go back and emphasise various things if you're interested in some of those. So maybe just have a look where I'm going with this. You notice I'm only going up to 85, 86, and there's all the stories from that have been told already, or have not been told, and there's some others that I can think of that I'd like to gather material on. If you can think of others or you know information about these, I'd be really happy to get it and try to expand upon those other things. So, is that okay for where I'm going? Okay, cool, thanks. I'll just come back to up here. The first car was imported into Australia in 1900. And within 5 years, people were already complaining about how dangerous the drivers were and how selfish they were. You can imagine that the only people that owned cars at that stage were extremely wealthy people, extremely privileged. So people were used to owning the street, really. So they found that very offensive, and why the automobiles are above the law. In Victoria in 1905, a law was debated called the Motor Car Bill that tried to put controls on cars, but was defeated. And former Melbourne Lord Mayor Sir Samuel Gillett said in the debate that a pedestrian has just as much right to walk in the middle of the road as he has to walk on the footpath. I mean, people don't think that way anymore. You know, how did that get changed? It was actually a very conscious effort to change those things. Yeah. William Irvine, member for Lower in Victoria, summarised the feelings of those who believe regulations were a necessity when he stated that motor cars should not be allowed to monopolise the roads. Motor lobby groups helped to scupper the bill, and a watered-down version was eventually passed in 1910 that omitted speed limits. The Royal Automobile Club of Australia was established in 1903 and based in Sydney, and the NRMA started in 1920. And the NRMA started advocating for buses over trams in the weekly motoring news section of the Sydney Morning Herald. You can see that this article is a bit more editorialising, but it's kind of got some good and bad in there, but it's pointing out the forces that wanted to banish the trams. The head of the NRMA, he did a trip to the UK and the US in 1926, and he was in a Mort of that. It was great. I said, look, 1 in 3 people there own a car, and because of that, there's no jaywalkers. I mean, at this stage, though, in the same year, so that's 1 car for every 3 people. In Australia at that time, it was only 1 car for every 15 people. So we had 5 times less the amount of cars. So the pressure was a lot stronger in the United States. So the NRMA, well, they campaigned this to get put a road through Victoria Park. Right, this is just intersection of City Road and Broadway, and there's the old tram thing, and you had Professor Holm there, whose buildings you might know at Sydney Uni is supported the students. He was going, no, you can't destroy that. But the NRMA said, I side strongly with the new road advocates who, like myself, may nevertheless be just as zealous of the people's rights as anyone else, just exerting, I'm an oppressed minority in my car, and I need to have rights just like everybody else. So they kind of stressed all their rights and stuff, and the crime of jaywalking was invented in the United States by a group of auto manufacturers. It's completely artificial construction. The word jay was an American word meaning like hick or hillbilly, in Australian English maybe bogan, right? So it was a way of sort of disgracing people that crossed the road and got in the way of your important vehicle. You weren't modern enough, right? And the NRMA was disappointed by the police not maintaining enough safety. So when these laws were introduced, like 770 jaywalkers could be fined in 1 day. And you can understand why. Here they are at the corner of Market and Pitt Street. Looking north. They're swelling over the footpath. There might have been a special event on there. It looks like night time, doesn't it? And the cars are whizzing past. You can't. They're so blurry, right? And look, there's people that have got huge cars that take up a whole lane of space. Yeah, well, I'm in my car. I'm important, so I get to take up a whole lane. And you get fined if you get in my way or killed, right? So now this situation, imagine it's 5 times as dense as cars in the United States, and so the situation developed much more rapidly, and thousands of people were being killed all over the United States, and huge monuments were put up to publicly mourn the deaths of all, specifically the children, and they held big protests, and all of those children there in that picture are holding up a flower to represent each child killed in the city in Pittsburgh in 1921. So those numbers are much greater though in America than in Australia. And so a number of cities were successful in pushing back, and in Cincinnati they got a speed governor bill on the ballot. A speed governor is a mechanical device which limits the speed of a car. It comes from steam engines, stuff like that, just physically cannot go faster than a certain speed. And that 42,000 people signed the petition, and then when it came to vote on it though, the Cincinnati car dealers raised $10,000 and managed to get a representative at every polling booth, and the vote eventually failed. So Motordom, as they started to call themselves, realised they had to unite together to push back against this effort to limit car use. You know, we really didn't sort of kick off much action in Australia other than just a bit of jaywalking until after the war. Okay, a lot of people know, oh, it wasn't a tragedy, we lost all the trams. What people don't really know is actually the strength of the campaign to stop them being removed. And that's why I want to tell this story. Between 1932 and 1940, a few isolated or minor tram lines were closed and replaced by buses, such as at Summerhill, Manly and Erskineville, sadly. That's an Erskineville tram actually coming up Pitt Street. And perhaps those rationalisations might have been justified because the whole network was being electrified and so on, and maybe there were certain situations where it just wasn't quite, the patronage wasn't quite good enough. But it wasn't until 1949 that the destruction was really going to sort of start taking place. On Friday night, the Transport Commissioner, Windsor, announced that on Monday morning, buses would replace the trams to Watson's Bay. It was the most popular route at the time because a lot of people living in the eastern suburbs all along the way, and also on the weekend hugely popular as just a weekend fun destination. A few days later though, people are already complaining. Oh, it's costing more, you know, oh, I have to get off a different stop, you know, faster's more comfortable, you know, I don't like it, right? Well, Windsor was like, oh, you know, it's fine, it's really good, he's just ignoring it, right? That's within a few days, so the Herald's been getting a lot of letters about it. And a week later, he just ups his game and goes, guess what, I'm not going to just truncate it at Rose Bay, I'm going to truncate it at Double Bay. And people were fuming about that. And it's going to be, did you say just there, it's going to be okay, right? Because we're going to build the Eastern Suburbs Railway within a few years. Right? Oh, yeah, don't worry. So you can wait, it doesn't matter. Right? Actually, it ended up taking 30 years from that point for it to be built. Yeah, well, the council and people organised a huge protest meeting, and Reginald Windsor was heckled really badly. And he said, okay, I'm not going to stop it at Double Bay, you can keep it to Rose Bay. Yeah, that was kind of round one, was a little bit sort of pushback, right? So you're just going to go to Rose Bay, I'm not going to take any more, and the Eastern Suburbs Railway is only 5 years off. I just in the previous slide, only 1 month later, can you say 4 years there?
Yeah, in the middle.
Yeah, 4 years. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So 1 month later, now it's taking 5 years. Like how, you know, one sort of an extra, it should be now, 3 years and 11 months. No, it was actually already starting to go up. So anyway, the residents got a petition together, Vaucluse Progress Association, and they made a huge petition. They had it, you know, put coupons, and they really got going. And the battle was on again. And a group of maintenance men were like, heard what Windsor was saying, and they said, that's ridiculous, you know, actually it's in really good condition, and you know, and I'll have a long grey beard before the Eastern Suburbs Railway is built. Yeah. And eventually at the second meeting, Windsor didn't turn up, and he just made an announcement that says, guess what, you can have all your trams back all the way to Watson's Bay. So yeah, they won, right? So that was the first little victory. He just read out a message. 300 people came to the meeting, but it was put back with reduced frequency. And again, gales of laughter greeted the reference to the railway being complete very soon. Yeah. And then, so people in the Herald were getting really excited. Oh, maybe the tram's going to come back, because they'd removed a few others, right? And Norm Boxall, you see his name over a lot of tram stuff. It seems like he was an avid collector of images and the tram enthusiast. He wrote to the Herald. He's going, oh, can you respond now that you've done the right thing, can you respond to all those petitions and protests and meetings that are demanding the restoration of other tram services? So these were going on, but you don't see them in the Herald. They're too small, and a lot of those little local newspapers have not been scanned, or you can't receive it. Yeah. And guess what? So this guy, A. Shaw, he's from Ryde, and he's going, you know, now you've but you're going to bring that back. Well, please bring back the Ryde tram. It used to go over the former Glebe, before the Glebe Bridge there was a different bridge, and it went all the way to Ryde. And then they stopped it before the bridge, and then you had to get on a bus there or something. Well, sure enough, with that combined effort, they actually got all those trams back. Further protest was so successful that the Watsons Bay tram was relaid, and on Sunday 28th, 1950, trams returned to Watsons Bay as well as the Gladesville Bridge on the recently closed Drummoyne route. And the reopening of these trams caused pause in the conversion program, and no further withdrawals were undertaken until 1953. Guess what happened in 1952 though? Joe Cahill became Premier, and he cancelled the new trams after only 100 had been delivered. He also stopped work on the Eastern Suburbs Railway that same year. And they adopted a new policy, which is discussed in this paper, that the New South Wales government began to implement a policy which ensured that lines in the future could not be easily reopened. Such measures included running final tram service in the early hours of the morning with heavy police presence to stop the protesting, and removing the equipment and stuff straight away. So there's no way that people could see it and think, oh, you bring it back. They couldn't experience it. It wasn't a trial thing. They could reverse. And then the trains were stripped and burnt at Randwick. And to sort of lighten the load, what they did is they got glamour girls, models and stuff to give out bus timetables and stuff like that and make everyone happy. It's a bit. Don't you think it's a bit like the new practice when they close down a line to privatise it or something, and they have pink buses and all that sort of stuff. It's just a similar thing, Even Lily and Jim, unfortunately, got behind all that sort of stuff. But anyway, it was I don't like that. Anyway,
Into the harbour or onto the scrap heap, it made no difference. In Sydney, the trams had had their day. Horses had given way to steam, and steam to electricity. And now diesel oil has taken over, and the trams are burned as buses rule the roads.
Same process happened in the United States. I think they tried to make it really clear that this was happening so that people would think, oh, you can't bring the trams back. The Secretary of the Railway for Warringah Committee said the government is making an £8 million blunder. It is wasting assets worth £6 million in closing up Wyndham Tunnel and the rail facilities on the bridge, and another £2 million on converting to a roadway. Traffic figures show the new road will be saturated from the moment it's opened. It will handle 3,000 cars an hour, where electric trains can carry 50,000 passengers. Elimination of the space for rail tracks on Harbour Bridge is a political scandal. All the North Shore councils, municipalities and progress associations are up in arms over it. So, people on the North Shore are not happy either. What you discovered is that the downtown trade started to dry up because it was all congested with cars. David Jones, the heir of the David Jones retail, department store empire, was opposed to it, and they were part of citizen reform, which is sort of people think of as a bit of a more right-leaning grouping that dominated the city council, city of Sydney Council. That actually ended up doing some kind of good things in a way. So the NRMA said, oh, but now you're just going to provide more parking. And that's a precursor to the parking requirements, which effectively enforced lower density and encouraged more car use. And just as to the current day, we now realise that making parking requirements and all that parking is a huge amount of space. It's a big mistake in cities. Rough estimates put the number of parking spaces provided at between 3 to 4 per car. So you might have a space where your car is now, but there's 3 or 4 out there in the world where it's waiting for you to park in the future, right? And with this, when this space is added to the road area required for car movement, plus area required for sales, repair and traffic signage, it comes out close to the floor area of an average home. Detroit, for example, ended up dedicating 74% of its land to cars, which accelerated urban decay. Business was falling in the city as a result of this transition, removing the trams. And before they even were all gone, people were starting to say in the paper, best thing might be to go back to trams. And North Sydney Council, as I said before, was getting into it and was saying, look, stick to Bradfield's plan, make the eastern 2 lanes of the Harbour Bridge into the Warringah line, as was originally planned. But it didn't happen, and all the final tram services closed. I mean, even despite all that, doing it at night and having police presence, people were still extremely in love of the trams and showed their support by putting wreaths and crowding on. black crepe paper, which is a symbol of mourning, which you'll see in other campaigns in the future that I'll mention. And there's a special device, thing that follows straight after the last tram, just to cut it all down and remove straight away. Yeah. But thanks to all of the transport nerds and the tram lovers, it all still lives on in the Loftus Tram Museum. I really recommend you just go there and check it out sometime. And sure enough, when I was there, I knew about this route, and it was showing Golden Grove, and I knew, Golden Grove's the very second last stop for Erskineville. Can you guys just turn it around a little bit? So I turned it, and sure enough, it was Erskineville. Yeah. So I want to get a t-shirt like that. I was like, listen, and the green, yeah. So the next big mistake, the Cahill Expressway. At that stage, it was called the Clarke Overhead Railway. It was the original name. When the plans became public, there was considerable opposition, and people called it ugly and ridiculous and so on. And there's a whole chapter of a book called Great Mistakes of Australian History dedicated to it. So it's a pretty big mistake. Because you can see it totally cuts off the city from the harbour. And that's one of the most beautiful things about Sydney. So the Key Planning Projects Committee was formed. It had a bit of support from the City of Sydney. Reg Bartley from Civic Reform was the Lord Mayor. He opposed it, but he was followed by Charles O'Dea of Labor, who in 1949 said it was too late to stop it. I mean, it still wasn't built for about 10 years, but anyway, too late to stop. And the Key Planning Committee appealed to the City of Sydney Labor aldermen, but to no avail.
Don't worry.
Here are the two options. We're all in the WestConnex campaign. You're all familiar with the two options that you all get to choose between. So here are the two options. One is an elevated roadway across Circular Quay, and the other is an elevated roadway across Circular Quay. What would you like? The only thing that's going to escape demolition is the Royal Automobile Club building there. Yeah. Which should become relevant because their windows are right in front of the Cahill Expressway when it was built. Sure enough, students got there and they held a big banner in front of it, right in front of the Royal Automobile Club, saying, Joe's Drive-In, the bridge on the River Quay, starring Joe Cahill and his cost of millions, took 30 years to build. Now, the paper called it a reenactment of the De Groot incident, but that really kind of gets it wrong, because De Groot was a far-right group that was like trying to steal some of the limelight from, this great public works project, whereas this was like saying, these students didn't like it at all. They were like, no, you own your huge mistake, right? This is bad. I suppose by cutting the ribbon, it sort of brings that to mind, but it's a very different idea that they had behind that. Now, stage 2 of the Cahill Expressway was constructed in a deep cutting along the edge of the Royal Botanic Gardens, severing it from the domain. And a lot of people talk about removing that thing, the Cahill Expressway from the Circular Quay, but I didn't realise. I was reading Killing Sydney, Elizabeth Farrelly's book, and she talks about this. Can you imagine, if you're standing at the front of the steps of the Mitchell Library, can you imagine what it used to be? It was continuous green. Yeah. And that was called Fig Tree Lane, and it was up on that surface there, right? Now you've got that Shakespeare sculpture that is completely isolated in the middle of the road. And if you come out of the art gallery, for example, and you're walking down to Botanic Gardens, and you maybe turn to your left and you look at the city, and it's kind of grand with all those cars coming down in the lights and everything, but that was all green there. Yeah, so I think if they're going to do some repairs, and it has been talked about, is to actually just grass that over and make it a complete connection. Like, that would make it a huge big park area. Yeah. Cahill died before that final stage 2 was complete, and the road was named after him. Which is kind of fitting. It's just, it should be an insult, really. Like you Cahilled it, or something. Yeah. Yeah. How am I going so far? I've been talking for quite a lot. This is interesting. Keep going. All right, cool. So now, how did all these mistakes get going? So I got part of my interest in this historical sort of aspect from reading this fantastic book by Peter Norton, Fighting Traffic. And he's a great guy. I contacted him. I held a forum with him. He did a bit of research about Sydney as well. And it's about a lot like my method, is just to go through old clippings and newspaper stuff and just compile them in a trove. And even Google's really good for getting all this kind of information. He did all of this about America about 10 years ago. and that's where the story about the invention of jaywalking comes from. It's from him bringing it back. So he's a great historian. I'm going to send all my stuff to him, and I hope he's proud of what I've done. Yeah. So this is just a bit about what happened in the United States, because all like it kind of got copied over here, got reproduced over into Australia. So they realised that it wasn't enough just to like widen roads and do things. It was actually, you've got to change. You have to have a radical revision of our conception of what a city street is for. They aimed to change people's thinking about who had the right to the road. And in 1924, there was a young guy, Miller McClintock, who was just finishing his PhD in the new topic of traffic management. Previously, it wasn't a thing that ever needed to exist, right? And he needed some money. So the #1 Studebaker dealer in Los Angeles found him and said, "Can you make a traffic ordinance that like gets all people out of the way and like makes it all these different cars?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'll write that. Okay." He needed some money, right? And he established an ordinance. It was 100 years ago, almost a little bit more than 100 years ago today, and it was by far the most influential city ordinance for the regulation of pedestrians. Explaining his ordinance restriction of pedestrians, Miller McClintock wrote, "High-speed motor traffic makes the practice known as jaywalking almost suicidal." Implemented on January 24, 1925, the LA traffic ordinance quickly spread. It got the acclaim of Motordom from coast to coast. Studebaker made Hoffman a corporate vice president, and it also endowed the first National Traffic Engineering Institute with McClintock as its director. Motordom used the LA ordinance as a basis for the model traffic ordinance, which spread all around the United States. And that became grounds for raising speed limits and deterring pedestrians and using them as the excuse for their own deaths and delay and stuff like that. So now, guess what? Pedestrians are to blame for 65% of their own killing. We've got a death wish. Perfect. Just change the law, and that must be what you wanted. I guess so. That's what happened in the United States. So now let's copy it over in Australia, and look, similar thing happened. And it's coming back to Australia. Well, the Australian Automobile Association got together and convinced the federal minister to start a thing on which they would be on the panel and decide, oh yeah, we'll comprise the government representatives and representatives of all state and automobile clubs and other bodies interested in road safety. I mean, isn't there everybody a pedestrian, interested to have a say in that, But no, they get the say, and Australia had the second highest rate of accident rate per head in population in the world at that stage. So the Australian Road Safety Council is formed by motor interests to advance, their vision of the road. And by next year, they got John Bradman on board.
A great place to break a window, or with a bit of luck, bad luck, you can even break a leg. It all depends on how you hit or get hit. Particularly lucky. Look who's coming to pick him up. That was close. I nearly hit you.
Yes, aren't you some present?
Yes, that's right, laddie. Come on. Now listen, boys, you know I like playing cricket as well as you do. But if you want to play for Australia, there's something you must not do. Practice on the road. Too many children are hurt, and some are killed, because they practice on the road. The park's the place for that. Now hop in the car and I'll tell you what
How
I'm
are you going to get to the park?
That's right, son.
You need an adult to drive you.
Youngsters are often hurt when they try to break away from someone looking after them. Junior doesn't like it, but Big Brother knows better.
Brought to you by, Motordom, really. So, yeah. That's, and so the kids lose their independence. They rely on someone to drive them and perhaps pick them up again or wait. you know, and not many people had a car anyway at that stage. Like, and what, to stop them playing cricket? You're the greatest cricket player of all time. Like, you're telling kids to not play cricket. It's really quite bizarre. But anyway, this whole ideology was so strong. It was even, you know, modernist artists like Le Corbusier were proposing these kind of things. And GM put on these huge Futurama exhibits in New York, where, you know, it was like the imaginary city, and people were on a bit of a ride, like a Jurassic Park style, you know, ride, and 100,000 people went through a day, like 20,000, and then over the time of this thing, hundreds of thousands of people saw it, and they all got a badge. I've seen the future. It was never sort of question where these cars were going to park, though. You know, yeah. Now I use these stats from Philip Fowles, former councillor Philip Fowles, just to show how Sydney went off the rails. Before 1940, we had this many stations. Since 1940, we had 4 less stations in Sydney, up until 2009. Only 10% extra increase in that entire post-war period in rail, and naturally the size of the city tripled. And private car use rose from 13% in 1946 to 87% by 1981. Cahill loved the roads, and he went to New York and he saw how fantastic it was. Actually, he stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, where they did show mini Futuramas, some of the dioramas and stuff for there, so he probably saw those and was like, oh, I love all the clover leaves, and I love all that. You've got to have all that in Australia. We've got to catch up, right? The cost will be huge, but, you know, think about all the time you lose, like, in traffic jams, so it'll be worth it in the end, yeah. And the gradual switch from trams to buses should include the flow of traffic, city traffic, which we know just didn't happen. Yeah. Well, he died in 2 years, so poor Joe. Yeah, even like I think Jeffrey Smart's Cahill Expressway, that's a painting from 1962, just 4 years after it opened. Sort of expressed some sort of modernist pleasure at it. Like, sort of seems to think it's kind of good. I don't know, but this guy it looks like he's been wounded in the war. He's missing his arm. I don't know, instead of, like, this is a very ambiguous painting, I think, in its meanings, and how it's evolved over time, our interpretation of its meanings. I think that's interesting. Yeah, they seem to, you know, and then there's like, you know, I mean, you had those Italian futurists, they were fascists and stuff, and Marinetti and stuff, so maybe there's some that kind of really liked this, like, dominating architecture that was really not human scale. Anyway, we got into mall culture big time. That's Chermside, Top Right, and Chadstone, all built 57 and 1960. Big mistake. The US experts were brought over here and told us what to do, and we all believed them. And Maya they set up an engineering scholarship, and young engineering graduates would go over to the United States to learn the gospel of motorways. And Grace Brothers building in York Street was commandeered by Douglas MacArthur during the war. And then they gave Grace Brothers a huge grant, which they used then to open all the suburban stores. And that's what ended up happening to cities like Houston in the United States. You just see, all, you know, it's really like it being bombed in war, really. It resulted in congestion, polluted cities, decaying and financially struggling downtowns. The city council can't raise any, you know, rent, you know, and stuff, and it's just, you know. The destructive forces of Motordom are still with us. They're still just as strong today. But starting in the 60s, new realities and renewed people power was going to become stronger. So, the inkling of it here in the Warringah Expressway. They started to build that, but the North Sydney Citizens' Rights Committee stood up to defend some people who were low-income people who were being evicted. Now, at that stage, the BLF was not yet headed by Jack Mundy. It was Mick McNamara, who's a relative of Dennis McNamara in the CFMEU now. And he just wanted to make sure that the union was getting involved, because they wanted to make sure that poor, lower income people were given some other reasonable accommodation to live in. But you notice it's not a green band technically yet, because they weren't opposed to the expressway. And in that sense, the North Sydney Residents Group, or whatever, was slightly more progressive because they were opposed to the motorway. Yeah, so just See that? Yeah, this is the guy he's saying, oh, the only thing he wouldn't do was cancel the expressway plans. So, you know, the resident group was ahead of the thinking of the union then, but I mean, the union needs, you know, that's their employment, it's their money, so perhaps that's fair enough. Now, it got bigger and more successful in Paddington, and the Battle of Jersey Road is the big battle that changed Paddington. So Duluth Cahill was a big engineering firm, and they were an American one, and we consulted them for all of our sort of roadway stuff, and they came up with all these plans. You've got to build them. One in particular was going to go from Liverpool Street alongside Hyde Park, and down the hill there to Darlinghurst, go in a 600 metre tunnel, then cross over in Paddington, and then another 700 metre tunnel, and you come back out at Double Bay Shopping Centre. And if you do that, it's going to cost so much that you won't be able to build the Eastern Railway. And they considered Paddington slum, so all that sort of striking area was considered slum ready for demolition, right? Why was it slum? Everyone had left because to the suburbs because that was like the new futuristic place to live, right? Anyway, in 1964, the Paddington Society became very active. It was formed and became very active with prominent residents such as Leo Schofield and Maggie Tabara. And from December 1964, the DMR planned major road widenings through Paddington that threatened 400 properties. They organised walks and publicity, but in 1967 the road widening plans had gotten even worse. And this is Jersey Road, and that red line shows all the houses that were going to be demolished on there. So the Paddington Society got together, and they called it the Battle of Paddo. Get the neighbourhood together, let's oppose this. You know, they managed to get this Commissioner Bunning to do a walkthrough, and he had observed all the heritage. Now, at this stage, I was just looking through the papers, I often found there were women's sections, supplements in a lot of the newspapers, and they had all the good info on this, right? Actually, they were like presenting the critique, and the main part of the newspaper, the editorial, was all like, saying, oh, you NIMBYs kind of stuff, like they were whingy. Yeah, so Penny McDonald, she came straight back from London, because she had heard that her house in Paddington was threatened, and she went straight to the Sydney Town Hall to the protest meeting. Good on her. Well, they put up the signs. Leo Schofield put the black crepe paper and organised a nice, genteel tea and scones protest. as Juanita Nielsen put in her Now newspaper. So Juanita Nielsen was getting involved, really supporting this. And now, I got this footage, not been seen since 1969 publicly. The nice people at the NFSA gave it to me. It's outtakes from a report, which probably was edited into a nice package, but this is silent material of that protest. It's not been seen publicly since 1969. Look out for the Avalon group that have turned up to show their solidarity. That's the Avalon Reservation Society. Very organised, they got the petitions, the letters, the postcards to send. You like the black armband view of history? How about the black? Police get off the road. Yeah. Okay, that's amazing.
Fantastic.
That's fine, that's really cool. So 2,000 people turned up to that protest. The Glebe Society sent a contingent, they were just formed. And they were greeted with cheers when they held up their banner, we support Paddo all the way. And eventually, it took until 1970, but they finally won. Now during this time, connections started to form between the residents and members of the BLF, which had become critical in the coming battles against expressways. future battles in Paddington would not just be about preventing a road widening, but would go further and actually have road narrowing and reduce road space. And how did that sort of start to come about? Well, I think it's like the 1960s and 70s counterculture movements. Now, you're probably expecting my next few slides that I'm going to start showing things like Vietnam and Black Power and all these other things, right? I'm going to get these are the nerd sort of people, like in the movement, that were like pushing different things. So you might not have heard some of these names, but I think they're really influential and quite important. Have you heard of Jane Jacobs?
Yeah.
Of course. Okay, good. So she helped save Washington Square Park, Greenwich Village, and stopped the Lower Manhattan Expressway. She had a theory of change in cities of how to affect positive change in a way that others sort of didn't. And as part of the West Connects campaign, we screened her documentary at Norton Street, and it was really good. Just a little snippet of the
There are a
highlights.
couple of ways of approaching the design of cities. The question is always, who decides what the physical form will be, how the city is going to function, and who is going to live in the city. In order to understand what's happening today, we need to think about two great figures in the middle of the 20th century who embody the struggle for the city. The legendary power broker, Robert Moses, represented the authority of the great man who was going to come into the city with his carving knife and clear away the cancerous tissue and replace it with the shiny implements of modernist planning.
You have to move a lot of people out of the way of a big housing project or sun clearance project. A lot of them are not going to like it. Many of them are misinformed.
In opposition to the homogenizing clarity of Moses was Jane Jacobs.
I have very little faith in even the kind of person who prefers to take a large overall view of things.
Jacobs was an outsider. She believed the city is not about buildings, the city is about people. It is about public spaces and the street, and she stood up for that.
She evolved both a theory of what made a good and just city and a theory of opposition to the kind of planning practice that Moses represented.
There's a prudishness, a fear of life, a wish to direct things from some uncontaminated refuge that is part and parcel of their bad plan.
They were famously at odds with each other. It really did become a war between opposing forces. Today, we're still fighting these battles across the world.
We wouldn't have any American economy without the automobile business. That's literally true. We believe that this is a great industry that has to go on and has to keep on turning out cars and trucks and buses, and there have to be places for them to run. There have to be modern roads.
The first of Moses' commandments for progress is, thou shalt drive.
Jane Jacobs was one of the very first people to say, the car is not supreme. The people who walk on the sidewalk are what makes the city.
It isn't hard to understand that producing and consuming automobiles might seem all important to the management of Ford and Chrysler and General Motors. But it's harder to understand why the production and consumption of automobiles should be the purpose of life for all the rest of us.
The highways, of course, destroyed the neighborhoods that they went through. where was this going to end? The whole place was going to be laced with highways. What would we have left of Manhattan?
Yeah. So very influential. Now another person slightly preceded her but was also influential is this Lewis Mumford. He's been described as an organic humanist. Not sure exactly what that means, but he wrote The City in History in 1961. He's probably most famous for a quote which we often used in the WestConnect campaign. It paraphrases him and says, "Building more roads to prevent congestion is like a fat man loosening his belt to prevent obesity." Yeah. The socialist character in Ellsworth Toohey in Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead was partly inspired by this guy Mumford. And just notice his slightly more establishment demeanour. Compared, and sort of like, doesn't really know how to make change happen. It's more just like, I'll get on TV and tell everybody what's right, kind of thing.
Shapes and forms. Mutilates and deforms might be better words, not only our cities, but whole city regions. Indeed, it seems to be the chief architect of our cities today, the most influential of all our city planners.
I'll move on from that. But, other big, the environmental movement's coming, Rachel Carson. The Greenpeace was formed in 1971. Believing more in, non-violent direct action. Colin Buchanan from the UK wrote this book. It was, popularised. It's about sort of separating people from traffic. It's still a little bit Le Corbusier and sort of a bit expensive, like not that sort of organic, But he was actually invited over in 1964 at the behest of the RACV, the Victorian NRMA. And spoke on the same conference as an American roads building guy. And the roads building guy from America was a lot more gregarious and spent a lot more time travelling around the country, and they liked what he had to say and they didn't really listen to Colin Buchanan, so he went home rather disappointed. You can look him up, it's interesting. Ralph Nader, huge advocate at the time, he wrote Unsafe at Any Speed in 1965, and he toured Australia in 1972 by Barry Jones. And but they were all out of expensive talks to go to. But then somehow the students at the University of Queensland organised a public event, and 6,000 people turned out to see him at the University of Queensland. Yeah. At this stage in 1965, road crash fatalities peaked in Australia at over 6 times their current level. So 1,200 people a year die in car accidents in Australia per year now. About 7,500 per year if you were on present population figures. LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, President, passed the Clean Air Act in 1965, and in 1966 he signed into law the Traffic Safety Act and Highway Safety Act. These are just minor little changes, really, just barely scratching the surface, but maybe you can say change is starting to happen. And LBJ said, when he passed the law, in this century, more than 1.5 million of our fellow citizens have died on our streets and highways, nearly 3 times as many Americans as we have lost in all our wars. Every 11 minutes a citizen is killed on the road. Every day 9,000 are killed or injured. 9,000! Last year 50,000 were killed. So it was changing. And National Geographic is really where it's, it's just pretty, I don't know, what do you think about the National Geographic? I don't know, it's kind of like, it's a bit Orientalist, imperialist kind of magazine, isn't it? Let's go out. But it's kind of, I don't know, but there it's sort of like coming here warning about the ecological crisis and using the blue marble image and stuff, And instead of a map, well, on one side you have, you open it up and you have a map. On the other side they had this, how man pollutes his world. Now, all of these were perfectly good reasons why we really needed to start addressing the environmental crisis and stop and reduce cars, right? But there was one thing that they didn't know about then, was at all, and it turned out to be far more important and more significant, and that's global warming. That wasn't part of that. This is just all localised air pollution and particles and getting in the rivers and killing the fish. It wasn't actually, none of this, they didn't realise you're going to actually warm the entire planet. So all the reasons that existed then, now exist in even more greater abundance today. All this suburbanisation was destroying the local corner stores, why housewives buy what they don't really need. It's all their fault, right? Well, that's actually a case of Gruen transfer. And you know the show, the Gruen transfer and stuff. That's Victor Gruen. Yeah, just you get so confused by the abundance, you don't know what you came for originally. Now, in this part, I thought it's a very interesting argument being made. I find it somewhere here. I should have highlighted it, but it says somewhere there. It says the reason why all the little shops are closing is a simple answer is more people, more money, more cars. Does that argument make any sense to you? How is a shop going to struggle because of more people with more money? That simply can't be the reason. So more people, more money, more cars. Those two are just ridiculous reasons, right? It's the cars that are causing the problem, right? You know, this little shop is like, causing the problem. Superhighway Super Hoax is a bit more of an obscure book, but it did inspire Albert Mispel. He read it and he was summarising it and mailing it to the politicians in the New South Wales Parliament. And at this time, freeway revolts were rising up all across the states. Now, Victor Gruen, from the Gruen Transfer, the ABC show, actually, he's a Viennese socialist, right? And he was born and raised in Vienna. He emigrated to the United States in 1938. And he wanted to recreate this kind of like nice European experience out in the suburbs, where you'd have a bit of a mall, right? You'd have some shops, you'd have people living, you'd have a public library, you'd have a school, university, businesses. Everyone would live together and they wouldn't need, have all the public amenities there too, right? Art galleries and stuff. And no one's interested in building that, right? The American planners don't care. But Macy's and the other, department store developers, like the equivalents of like Westfield and stuff, they were like, we'll have all, okay, yeah, good on you, Victor. Just get rid of all the other stuff and just make it into selling stuff. Just make it shops, right? And we'll cover it over. And he was the inventor of the shopping centre, the shopping mall. But he said, in a speech in London much later in 1978, he disavowed shopping mall developments as having bastardised his ideas. He said, I refuse to pay alimony for those bastard developments. And instead, he tried to focus on pedestrianising downtowns. And that, like Martin Place and Pitt Street Mall and places like that. He thought that was a much better thing. He preferred to do that. And actually, he had a big influence on Walt Disney and the Epcot Centre in Florida and stuff. And he wanted that to be sort of like this model village. But like it seems right. It's kind of utopian, but it's like, well, if you own all the stuff there, then you just basically got to spend all your money at the one guy that owns the whole thing. So, yeah, it just doesn't seem to work. Now, the culture is expressing its antipathy towards cars as well in these ways. Joni Mitchell, 1970. And The Lorax was made into an animated version. 1971.
Gentlemen, I wish to speak for the trees. Here are some facts to cogitate and ruminate. It takes 10 months for
His theory of change is like little smuffins. He's just going to like tell everybody that.
years before the seed grows into a sapling. It takes 10 more years.
Do you recognise this film? Truffaut. No, Jacques Tati. It's called Traffic. Also, Playtime's very good as well. Lampoon Car Dependency. The Balmain Society had a screening of that in 1976. Balmain Association. And what? Maybe you guessed the film? It's an Australian film. I've edited it very long just to get to the point quickly. Peter Weir. The cars that ain't Paris. Now this is quoting Morricone here with the music and stuff. Like, this guy has crashed the city dwellers or the village dwellers here in Paris. They kind of car obsessed in some way. They make people have crashes on their outskirts by flashing lights in their eyes. And they cobble all bits of your car and sell them to keep their economy going. And if you survive, they'll do medical experiments on you to turn you into some kind of zombie. But this guy survives, and he's too smart, so they make him into something else.
All right, are you? Don't you want to be a doctor anymore?
Well, they give me a new job. Paramount, you see. Well, the mayor said that I'm supposed to tell people where to park. Do you think you could, move a little?
A version of that car was used in the last Mad Max film. So I see Mad Max as being a blending of the cars out in Paris and Waking Fright. You take this two and you kind of it's almost the same thing. And this footage, what does that remind you of? What I've done? Yeah. Also, these changes start to affect the federal government, and Gough Whitlam in its Times speech said, cars are a real threat to our cities, and the oil crisis came on. So in 1973, OPEC announced that it was implementing a total oil embargo against any countries that had supported Israel at any point during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Wow. So they should. Free Palestine. Yeah. Petrol prices shot up in late 73 and stayed high for the rest of the decade. And this caused auto manufacturers to make some minor tweak, like, we'll sell you slightly smaller cars or slightly more fuel efficient. And so this all, I put this all together and think about how different the attitude and the approach is today,
of proposals
to
for a railway to
the
serve
optimism
the eastern suburbs of
and
Sydney,
positivity and the
spanning
arguments
centuries,
given
and going back as far as the 1870s,
for building a
at last, the Eastern Suburbs Railway is a reality. First, the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Then the Opera House. And now, Sydney's Eastern Suburbs Railway. Each in its own way a masterpiece of design and engineering. A symbol of modern Sydney rising to eminence among the great cities of the world. The Eastern Suburbs Railway was built at a cost of $168 million and is the first extension to our passenger rail network in New South Wales since 1956, when the circular quay link was opened. The Eastern Suburbs Railway is truly an engineering masterpiece, built to the best standards in the world and bringing untold benefits. It has introduced a new concept in commuter travel, resulting in a rapid transit rail service able to move large numbers of passengers into and out of the city in the quickest possible time. A reduction in road traffic on the arteries leading into and within the city proper, as many buses terminate at the two bus-rail interchange stations. A further reduction in road traffic as motorists recognise the speed and convenience of rail and switch to trains. Conservation of fuel resources so vital to our nation's future as a result of motorists leaving their cars at home and swinging to pollution-free, energy-saving rail travel. With pollution of our Sydney atmosphere of such concern, rail travel makes more sense. Major relief to the congested City Circle rail system with the integration of Eastern Suburbs and Illawarra line services. At a time when many overseas railways are phasing out their passenger operations, the huge capital investment in the Eastern Suburbs Railway highlights the determination of the New South Wales Government and the Public Transport Commission to improve the state's public transport services. New trains, new buses, new ferries, new space-age signalling and new workshops, and the new Eastern Suburbs Railway all dramatically confirm public transport is getting better in New South Wales.
Okay, so I've used up nearly about an hour, and I'm up to only up to there.
Part two.
So, Peter, did you want to say anything, or people want to, I don't know, get a drink, have a break, or, I mean, here's my idea is, out of these, like, ask what things you would like to emphasise, so I can kind of condense it all, and I just do want to, I do want to get to Erskineville and the musical finale.
You might have to choose for a second, but we can have a 10-minute break if people feel like it. Do you want to, or do you want plow on? Keep going. But can you jump to, because I think you can do the whole lot.
Like, I'd be interested in the Warringah Expressway because I went through it today.
Look, I'm just going to flash a lot of these before your eyes, I think, and just no.
Have you got the BLF with me?
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to just go really quickly over some of these things. So, now, Martin Place was pedestrianised. George Clarke had a huge influence on that. The NRMA opposed it. There was a huge carnival at the opening, and the Nimrod Street Players did this funny thing, like critiquing car culture at the opening of it. And in the same step of moves, they removed all those cars from this is Town Hall. this is where all the protest happens. So you take this, when the massive amounts of space used for cars are taken away, you get a chance to protest again.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and so that was very popular. And they did a little special on George Clarke in 1973. And this does have Jack Mundy in it. So maybe.
I experienced the great experiments of post-war British socialism, the attempts to nationalise land, the buildings of the new town, all directed by aspirations for social justice. But the British at that time had no concept of citizen participation in planning. All of the policy decisions and programs were decided and directed by the elites of the upper class civil servants and professionals. It was in the United States that I came across the melting pot of community planning as a battlefield of conflicting interests. If we want better cities, towns and suburbs, then our whole community has got to go back to school. And it's beginning to happen here.
Trying to tell everyone how to run it. So, possibly we should try and look at a combination of policies to try and see the solution, and not just say that the again the elite will tell us what to do.
How are you going to manage to raise the level of consciousness and awareness amongst the people to achieve this?
Yeah, well, this is part of. I don't think we're going to get it in this sort of society. This is some sort of, I suppose, post-revolutionary society. We must raise the consciousness now, and this is what we're hoping. Well, I hope to see some sort of conscious state after.
By derivation, civilised people live in cities, and people who live in the country are pagans. When I'm using the word city, for God's sake, I'm not just referring to state capitals. I'm referring to a place of a decent, viable size, and it shouldn't be regarded as a four-letter word.
The toughest job we've so far tackled has been the City of Sydney Strategic Plan, which in 1971 began the long, difficult process of initiating, after decades of neglect, strong action to achieve the major objectives of more diversity in the city, a better social and physical environment, and greater accessibility. We're searching out the opinions and demands of all sorts of different people, such as Jack Mundy, Secretary of the Builders Labourers Federation. Jack, what do you feel are the important things we should put into the 1974 strategic plan for Sydney?
First of all, I think you've got a mammoth task, because we've seen in the last decade the virtual destruction of the city of Sydney in the tremendous imbalance that has taken place, not only in Sydney but in the near inner part. We have seen, haven't we, in the last few years, the developers, or so-called developers, are waxing fat, building great commercial edifices. At the same time, we are seeing the removal of theatres, nightclubs, and places with a bit of colour, things that are part of a city, that make a city live. We want everyday democracy. We want people having a say in the changing city of ours. And therefore, if you take note of that, I think we can restore some of the beauty and loveliness that was once Sydney.
For 183 years since the first settlement here at Sydney Cove, Australians have believed that the opening of new roads, the building of roads, the widening of existing roads is one of the holiest and most highly regarded things that can be done. But let us take one concrete example here in Martin Place of the quite revolutionary change in that attitude that may be said to have begun in the year 1971. Here, for the first time, a key piece of an inner-city roadway has, in fact, been closed to vehicular traffic and opened for the use of pedestrians. Now, the learning process involved in doing this simple little beginning of what is needed in the city has already occupied 20 years of my life. It was in the early 50s when I was working for the Cumberland County Council that I first saw that Sydney needed a city-wide pedestrian network so that one could walk from one side of the city to the other without ever coming into conflict with vehicles. But of course, such a notion was a piece of romantic heresy to the practical men then in charge of affairs. Now, it wasn't until the actions of the new City Council in 1969, the reaction of Cabinet to public opinion in 1970, that Martin Place was closed for a trial period of 6 months, which was rapidly ended when, after a period of a very few months, it was shown conclusively by the people of Sydney that they liked the temporary closing and they wanted it made permanent.
Yeah. Now, George Clarke went to the United States before that and had been a student of Lewis Mumford. He died in 2008, I think it was. He lived in Selwyn Street, Paddington, and there's an archive there. Before he died, he spoke to Clover Moore almost on his deathbed and said, you know, you've got to carry on what I've tried to do. And his former partner still lives there and holds the archive. And she kindly gave me that bit of video. And when I was speaking to her at the door, I said, oh, you know, that community education process, that's a little bit like parallel frere, isn't it? You know, she said, I haven't heard of that, but he was very influenced by Jane Jacobs, more than Lewis Mumford, is what she told me. So I thought that was interesting. Now, he had a big influence on his own area, so him and Christina lived just here. So that's where I visited. And these are lovely little streets. They really feel like you're like in Japan or somewhere like. And he helped the residents get a petition and completely close those to cars. And it's really a beautiful area now, right? And there's a plaque there dedicated to him. Go and see it.
There's some of that in Erskineville. Some of those.
Yeah, this sort of stuff. Yeah. Guess what? Juanita Nielsen was right into it too. She was promoting that sort of stuff. Yeah. She put this all through her newspaper. Let's pedestrianise parts of King's Cross, community participation, and these things happened. Yeah. Lane Kelly Place, Springfield Avenue. Guess what? She never lived to see it. She was gone in 1975. Yeah. Yeah. Killed by thugs and property developers. Yep. Now, right there is the spot where the 1978 Mardi Gras met its violent end with the police bashing all the people. Right there in front of the fountain. And it should be remembered that all protests are a temporary form of reallocating road space, like if they're on the street, aren't they? So they're a form of protest in that way. Yeah. Paddington Bazaar, that's really interesting. Like there was like this progressive pastor that just come back from Woodstock, and Neville Yeomans was this guy out at the various festivals and stuff. And they closed off Newman's, I think it's Newcombe Street, and it was like all people come from Nimburn, queer people could find refuge there. It was mental health services. And they were really doing a good job there. I think by this stage, maybe the Paddington Society was just more concerned about the parking and was not really pushing this stuff. So it actually took them quite a while to sort of get this stuff through by providing alternative parking, and the school supported them and stuff like that. But it helped a counterculture emerge in that location. It was eventually made legal in 1987. And Gary Waterspoon, in his book, Street Scene, has a chapter called From a Road to a Street. And, I just say that as a result of all that campaigning from the 60s, the Paddington Society through the 70s, that Oxford Street had become a place to go to, not just a place to go through. Nowadays, we call failed streets like Parramatta Road and Victoria Road and Princess Highway, we call them stroads. A street that has become a road just to pass through, not to go to. And during the 70s, the area became a focal point of the counterculture. Paddington Town Hall held concerts of Australia's first punk bands like Radio Birdman and the Saints, and of course Oxford Street was home to Sydney's queer scene. Also in the 80s, huge rap dance parties got their start in Paddington Town Hall, which spun off into the rave scene. Another offshoot of the rave scene was Reclaim the Streets, which launched a more upfront attack on car culture starting in 1971. So I came into the scene, I was like 20 and going out to dance parties, and I was like, this is really exciting, this is new energy, and I feel in some ways sort of benefited from all of that previous development of the culture before. I'm not saying stopping a road like made it happen, but it sort of helped to make it more into a place. And Mark Gillespie, when I told him my idea earlier in the week, I said, don't you think, I was expressing these ideas, and he said, yeah, later on he emailed me and said, yeah, go hard on that angle, right? So by, moving the cars, you can bring some new culture in there. You create a place that people value. So I say, as we the people change the street environment around us, the environment changed us in turn. So this is the big daddy of all campaigns, really. I know some people are here especially waiting for me to get onto this, so here goes. 1971, 1969, the Commonwealth increased funding for urban arterial roads by a third, and the DMR used all their money to start acquiring properties, including all the land in the Lyndhurst estate. They would have acquired right where you are sitting right now, because that is 22 Mountain Street, Ultimo, right there. So you would have been underneath a motorway right where you are now. Yeah. Now, part of the original route avoided Lyndhurst, the historic home, but because the Greyhound track wasn't happy about that, they moved it slightly north to avoid the stadium of the Greyhound track. Didn't consult the people, and so then Lyndhurst was going to be destroyed.
The New South Wales Department of Main Roads wanted to build 350 miles of freeways crossing the city in 6 directions, all converging on the city centre.
That's from Rocking the Foundations, which is really good worth seeing. Yeah, that's what it's going to be like. That was the display that they held. That is Parramatta Road along there. That's just ploughing through Glebe, Annandale and Leichhardt, all the way through to Concord. Here's Wentworth Park, and just avoiding that. It's a nice, good, don't stuff their dogs, but going straight through the middle of Lyndhurst. They managed to push the government into at least putting a bit under the tunnel there, but yeah, that's going to be insane. But actually today a lot of that does look like that now, doesn't it? With WestConnex, the Rozelle interchange, or a lot of it's under the ground, I suppose. But fortunately, from the mid-60s, resident action groups sprung up to defend inner city communities. So as you saw earlier, the Paddington Society, the Balmain Association, and the Glebe Society. All these groups became frustrated by a right-wing Labor-dominated Leichhardt Council that wasn't taking their concerns seriously. The Campaign for Better Council was formed for the September 71 council election, and most of the candidates were members of the resident action groups actively supported them. Together with Nick Oroglass and Izzy Weiner in Balmain, they made an informal coalition that won 8 of the 12 seats. Labor was reduced to 4. Oroglass became mayor. Together they instituted their concept of open council, where the resident participation in decision-making was given maximum effect. And it's a little book that Izzy Weiner published not long before he died that is all about that. It's quite interesting. They quickly organised a big public meeting to kickstart the campaign against the expressways in Leichhardt Town Hall that was attended by 1,000 people. Now, Nick and Izzy were very, very experienced union industrial campaigners. They really knew how to get a campaign organised. And you can tell from the articles at the time that they didn't know how to really mobilise people at a big meeting and get them all on task and doing something useful to progress the campaign. The relationship with resident action groups and the ALP was turning sour. State ALP tried to expel resident group members from local ALP branches and introduce a ruling to preclude them from membership. That photo is from Red Hot, Paul Greenland's book on Nick Oroglass. Now, as Albert Misbell, he was a guy from Glebe that had a huge educative sort of role, very friendly guy. Put poems in the bulletin, and started to get people together. He had read Jane Jacobs, and he had read the Superhighway Super Hoax book. They formed alternative plans to other affected councils. The DMR ignored them. 10,000 petition signatures was collected. All the resident action groups gave support, and leaflets were mass circulated. Badges were sold to raise money. The meeting elected 20 representatives. This is the Leichhardt Town Hall meeting with 1,000 people, right? To form the organising committee for the Anti-Urban Radial Expressway campaign, OREC, with Oroglass as its chair. One of the members was Alan Sorensen, who would go on to form the State Public Transport Committee, which then later changed its name and became Action for Public Transport New South Wales. Yeah. And this article is in the women's section, details in great detail all of the steps of that campaign and the town hall and how they got all the people organised. It's not in the main section of the newspaper. You can read it, it's totally an insider that was there at every meeting, was really supporting it. We're just kind of having that journalistic neutrality sort of on the surface. They put up these posters all around the thing, all around town, put X's on the road and stuff where things were going to be destroyed. And Oribus traipsed around these roads just trying to get media attention and stuff like that. That's Eric Sandblom on the right from the CDC coalition that they worked with. And then the Glebe Society started to put together, they used all their expertise, there's people at the meeting, and put together these alternatives, the North-Western Railway instead of the Expressway. And, they proposed to use the goods line, which became the light rail. It was just to go to Leichhardt first, but then they said, and they could put heavy rail there as well, like strapped up there, because it can go on those tracks, right? And take it all the way up to Chelmsford and Epping and connect with the rest of the system. And hook that in to the Eastern Suburbs line, which was then being built, to take it all the way down to Bondi. So all those people could avoid going through the city.
Yep.
Great idea.
Yep.
It was ignored, sadly. There it is. The light rail as well. So Lyndhurst was threatened. That's all the graffiti on the side of Lyndhurst. That's the Glebe Society president. He was a Professor
Bernard Smith.
Bernard Smith, who was son of a Marxist art critic. He always looks really dapper in these photos. Anyway, in July, the Save Lyndhurst Committee was formed. It held a fancy dress fundraising back to Lyndhurst event on 15th of April 1972, and Origlass came in his mayoral robes. In July, Leichhardt Council, resident groups and Save Lyndhurst Committee convinced the BLF to impose a green ban on the demolition of Lyndhurst. Note that it wasn't until 1973, June, that the bans became known as green bans. They were still, changed the name. Undeterred, the GMR purchased Lyndhurst in August 72 and were wrecking and demolishing nearby homes. Squatters moved into the homes to repair and protect what was left. Green ban. Woohoo! Around this time, a new, more radical activist group was formed called the Glebe Anti-Expressway Action Group, with leading members John Fisher and Alan Reeves. And Paul, you were in the Glebe group. Yeah, thank you. You gave me some good photos. They organised meetings, direct actions, and street theatre captured media attention. They engaged the local residents to stand up and defend the neighbourhood, cleaning up and occupying local buildings. Geeg reached out to the BLF requesting a wider ban, organising necessary numbers for a large and diverse public meeting to show community support. That was a condition of getting any green ban in place. You'd have a big community meeting that voted to get it on. Right? I'm going to get more info and expand on this in future. It's a lot of material. In August, 4 squatters in the Glebe home in the way of the expressway were arrested for trespass. The BLF bailed them out and provided legal support. Jack Mundy spoke at the road march on August 19, announcing the BLF green ban on all further demolition were connected with the expressway. The DMR eventually gave up soon after that. When the scab labour they hired ended up needing police protection, the BLF extracted a promise from the DMR that no further demolition would occur. This part of Glebe was safe for at least the time being. So the people who were part of this say, I'm getting it right. I hope I'm getting it right. Now, further south, this is the Glebe estate, and they got a green ban later on that as well. Yeah. These were owned by the Anglican Church, sitting in part of the Western Expressway. In October 72, the church announced their plans to sell. On 5th of December 72, Gough Whitlam was elected as PM. Origlass wrote a mayoral minute offering a proposal for a federal buyout of the church lands. He wrote to Whitlam, Tom Uren and the Minister for Housing with a copy of the minute. On 5 November 73, federal government decided to buy the 19 hectares of land, which included 700 homes, for the measly sum of $17.5 million. It's a lot more now, but that was pretty good. It was a pretty good deal, I reckon. 28 March 74, this is really in the late stage, the BLF extended their green ban to all demolition of houses for inner city expressways, and the contracts to buy that land was exchanged in May. Tom Uren wrote in his memoirs, Straight Left, I received a letter from the Mayor of Leichhardt, Nick Oroglass, asking for the Commonwealth to be involved purchasing and rehabilitating the Glebe estate. With Whitlam's encouragement, a study was made and we decided to go ahead and attempt to buy the estate. Uren also acknowledged Oroglass had initiated the process in a Glebe Town Hall meeting in 1974, so it's definitely, he had a big lot to do with it. Uren was particularly unimpressed by the arrogance of the DMR. At one stage, the head of the DMR remarked to him, my experience is that governments come and go, and governments go, but the DMR goes on forever. This is what he wrote. And that's true, like they just doesn't really go and just wait around and they'll come at you 10 years later. Yeah. Glebe Society bulletins were kept during trying to maintain the momentum through 72, 73. The Lyndhurst area was mostly owned by the DMR and protected only by a green ban.
Yeah.
Several mysterious fires occurred in DMR buildings, including 2 in Lyndhurst itself. So squatters moved in to try to sort of protect it, stop it being burnt down. You know, they own the building and they want to destroy it. What's to stop it from the demolishing? It's really, it was reoccupied by squatters and became an anarchist organising centre. In September 73, changing alliances in the Leichhardt Council meant that Oroglass lost the mayoralty. But it was still fairly progressive. They were trying to keep the campaign momentum, but the newspapers refused to publish the letters they were sending. There was some hope in the forthcoming Sydney area transportation study that the government was bringing out that it might stop the expressways. The green ban was holding, but the BLF was coming under enormous pressure. In January 2074, 250 police moved in to remove the squatters over in Victoria Street, King's Cross. Joe Owens, the new BLF secretary, wrote to the Glebe Society seeking financial support. The Glebe Society donated $100. That's all right. Got 70 to come. But nothing. Norm Gallagher of the Australian BLF, Federal, was trying to take over the New South Wales BLF. So they're under a lot of stress at this stage, right? Now, the Sydney area transport study was released in May 74 and was a huge disappointment. It actually took the existing thing and actually added more roads onto it. Yeah. And this was the Open Council newsletter. So still, even though Oroglass is not in charge, it's still doing these cool newsletters and talking about Open Council. These great billboards went up on Victoria Road. And there they are. And the person who was painting that is Paul. That's right. The design. Paul, do you want to say a few words about it?
Look, very briefly. It's not just my story, it's a story of a whole bunch of people, disparate groups that sort of came together sometimes. There was a small group of us. Someone came up with a design specifically for those billboards, and I think there was probably about half a dozen of us. Went on a Sunday. We took trestles, ladders, rollers, a lot of paint. We completed the whole thing in a day. It was, at the time, Australian posters had their posters all over it, and they weren't real pleased, and it didn't last very long. But it got a bit of publicity and certainly caught the eye of a lot of motorists, and we were lucky enough, just purely by chance, Tom Uren was going past and just stopped and said hello. So we sort of a little bit of federal government support, but yeah, it was just one of the actions of people concerned about that particular expressway.
Thank you very much, Paul. That's fantastic. Yeah. Anyway, it all came to a head in September 28. The DMR started a surprise demolition of the Sunderland Arms Hotel in Fig Street, Ultimo. The following day, a meeting of 80 people was held, and a call out went to defend the homes, about to be demolished at 6 a.m. on Monday. 13 people were arrested that day. Bob Hawke was being drawn into the campaign because the AWU were not under the ban, and they were like, well, we'll tell him to get them on the ban and stuff. But then he started going a bit of a fight in the meeting with Jack Mundy. They were at odds with each other. On national television that very night, he made a criticism of Monday. Yeah.
Hero to the end.
This is from Green City by Richard Cole. It's a Green Band Zero documentary. Some of this footage is also in Rocking the Foundations. Are you in the shots here? Oh, yeah, there's a photo I've got of you. Yeah. Just right back in. There's a half-hour documentary on this called The Fig Street Fiasco by Tom Zabricki. It's one of his first films. If you want more detail on that, go to that. That's Paul on the top left up there. Good on you.
With a bit more hair.
But actually, within a few days, they managed to stop the demolition. And Uren was in touch and you're going to have to negotiate with us or we will withdraw the federal funding, the next payment. Now, snarky as ever, the Herald is like, follow the freeway, save our slums in the Fig Street. Like, you know, it's not getting it, right? And so their editorials all sympathising with the police who had such a bad job to do. Yeah. Anyway, it was eventually stopped. It appeared inevitable now that 4.28 million federal grant for New South Wales urban and arterial roads would be withdrawn. Then on Saturday, there was a big protest organised. You can see Joe Owens, Albert Misspell, Neville Rand came. He would come to power 2 years later. And Oraglass is there, a bit theatrical, holding a coffin that says RAP Northwestern Expressway. Yeah. In the end, it took the combined forces of Leichhardt Council, Glebe Society, resident activists such as Geeg and squatters, the BLF, the Same Universe Committee, and the National Trust and the federal government to defeat the DMR. Internal comments. I might mention that later on, an investigation was done. David Kirby, who's the brother of Michael Kirby, did various road studies under Rand that sort of then made some good progress and helped to get the airport line built and containerisation and you move the trucks away. But unfortunately, the TWU didn't get into it and ended up running trucks all over the city. But yeah, and a lot of detail from that section I got from a great PhD thesis by Joanna Trainer. Yeah, it's really cool. And just right there, that's where V-Spy, the band lived. And they wrote a great song about their experiences. The Eastern Expressway was also stopped, kind of in the same process, I would say. This is down the art gallery. This was all going to be demolished. I mean, that's an artist's mock-up. They owned all the houses there. People started squatting in them. And you can see that it was going to come up there. So that's the view from, you're not familiar with because that's from the view from the north. This is the north-south-north view. Coming down there and around there. And the only section of this that ended up being built is that little Sid Einfield Drive. in the end because we won. Yeah. And yeah, V-Spy lived there and they made this song, Don't Tear It Down, which got to number 11 on the charts about their experiences. I can't stop. Stonemasons are becoming a thing of the past. They wrote a lot of socially conscious songs. I thought they like the Australian version of the Clash. Castlecrag was also under threat, and yeah, the Progressinisation managed to get a green ban on there as well. And Jack Mundy spoke at a meeting years later when they thanked him. And then they did this Warringah Transport Corridor inquiry. And right there, I want to go to this spot. I took this from the internet, but at the end of Castlecrag, this is where it would have gone. You can stand right there on that spot and look out where there would have been like a 6-lane motorway just here. Yeah. Even in Newcastle, there was a threat. Now, this shows just how bad, and this is, I should maybe a content warning for any Indigenous people here. This is really disturbing.
At one time, these sandstone ridges were used by Aborigines for ceremonial purposes, and their rock engravings were frequently encountered during construction. The engravings were carefully recorded before blasting. Engravings were cut out and removed for preservation and public exhibition.
It's just so bad. Anyway, yeah, they put a green ban up there as well and managed to save a bit of forest or parkland. Now, street closure struggles were also important in this stage, and North Sydney Council was always quite progressive. Resident Action Group power was growing. Robin Reid was a former uni radical that got involved in the Victoria Street Action Group and became, and future first female Lord Mayor Carol Baker, mother of current independent Zoe Baker, were elected to council. They were pushing back against greedy developers. Mundy recalls in his book, Greed Bound to Beyond, that he was courted by a developer there but they were frustrated by those progressive councillors. Anyway, they managed to, they wanted to get some roads closed and put in road closures, but the state government wasn't happy, and this guy, the single guy, Mr. C.C. Chopin, objected to it to stop the rat runs and stuff. He liked the rat runs. But eventually Lawrence Street made a judgment that the council did have the right to close the roads, and they were closed in these 4 locations here. Yeah. And that legal case sent sort of shivers down the state government, who then quickly reacted to try to stop the council having this power. But Nick and Izzy picked up on it and used it to shut down the Mort Street container terminal. Yeah. So like this was really radical at the time. You know, just closing street. Again, this went through a lot of legal stuff. Just to tell you that now we know that small business owners massively overestimate how many customers they get by car. They're always wrong about it, right? Yeah, it happens in all countries. Anyway, these judgments would have wide ramifications. Anyway, Lake Mort was eventually built, and it's a really nice spot. I was just going to visit it.
It was all the fun of the
went through a lot of stuff.
Early last
and you can go there and you can guess who was there.
opposition to the plaza has diminished, nor 3 plaintiffs on the equity court. Another has sold his shop.
Anyway, so they tried to put in laws to stop these road closures. So Nick and Izzy picked up on this and tried to use that law and managed to finally persuade the councillors to put in place a gate that would stop all the trucks going up and down the road. And it got even worse because a nurse died in a crushed car. So they held a protest, and this forms this subject of Thompson Ricky's first film called We Have to Live With It. See Laura Glass there, and Izzy Weiner just behind him.
Mrs. Moore will tell you all about the position in Mort Street over that span of time.
The father, who's of the daughter of the girl who died, spoke, was given the megaphone. Izzy's like, you just got to get out there and protest and, get active on the streets. You can just do all the petitions and letters you want, but you won't get anywhere. And then they had this street theatre where they pretended it was quite funny.
When our official representative
the Maritime Union, some union did actually do a bit of green ban. They eventually convinced the A&L to pack up, and they were gone, and they moved to Botany Bay. And all that process helped to move all the containers over to Botany Bay rather than in the inner city. Then, because of those changes, then malls became more accepted, and the success of Barton Place. And Joan Thorburn in Manly, he managed to get the Corso pedestrianised. It's much nicer now. Actually, people have this kind of nostalgia about the old days. Yeah, there's nostalgia, but I'm trying to say, look, okay, it's nostalgia, but this is don't be so nostalgic. This is actually better, right? Yeah. Then you've got Oxford Street Mall opened in conjunction with the Eastern Suburbs Railway line. Bankstown Station area was completely pedestrianised, but it was all removed 20 years later. Yeah, it's the only pedestrianisation I know that was actually removed. That's during the 78, and that's 20 years a bit later.
And actually, when that Centro shopping centre was put in, it just killed so many businesses in the other area. Because it had been quite thriving, quite varied, and then Centro got there, and that was just divided.
The DMR plans actually wanted to demolish Piedmont Bridge, so the Green Man helped save that and became a pedestrian walkway. That's Victoria Avenue, Chatswood. Rose Street, Eastwood is lovely. I want to go there in spring and see the Wisteria. Was that North Sydney? They actually helped. They made that street actually to help the bypass to get cars on the thing. Parramatta.
Yeah, wow.
Pitt Street Mall. Now the top 10 most expensive retail district in the world. That's Rockdale, Cronulla. These are all happening 87, 88, 91, Cabramatta, Hornsby. There's an unusual fountain up there. It's got a lot of symbolism. And Liverpool, where the Wiggles played in 94 after it was pedestrianised. Anzac Mall in Campsie and East Circular Quay. So much better. You could put a toaster there and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Now, this totally didn't work though in America, where it was originated by Victor Gruen. So this idea of pedestrianisation is Victor Gruen's idea. Yeah. Well, this guy, his name is, he has a good YouTube channel, Dave Amos, and he studied this, and they all got built in the United States up to this point, and then they removed 70% of them. Right. But in Australia, they seem to be working, and they started, even though they started kind of later. And you can participate. It's, the urban society's got this thing. You can vote your favourite urban place. And even today, people are campaigning. Scan this QR card if you want a thing at Marrickville Town Square, just like that. They're not easy to get in place. Get a few more signatures, they'll get to 1,000. Maybe Darcy will do something about it. Yeah. There was a lot of protests in the 70s. Mundy and that were demanding. And the very first critical mass happened in 1974.
The students did jump what they planned.
Crossed over the bridge. I'll skip over that. Erskineville street closure. This is what sort of. I'm going to get to the end, so it's on my I got passionate about in the first place. So yeah, they managed to get in place all the studies, because actually a lot of kids have been killed, and you know, this is what a street closure thing sort of looks like. This is from 1982. It's a Labor councillor, Warringah, what's her name, explaining to the residents who are a little bit sceptical what's going on. Now the trees in that park 40 years later are huge, and yeah, it's a really
Are they
nice...
blocking the view?
Yeah. Anyway, they amalgamated South Sydney Council in an attempt to boost their right-wing ALP numbers, but actually it worked totally against them. And guess who got elected? Mundy. Frank Sartor, who at this stage in this story is a good guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
These are all progressive councillors and Clover.
Yeah.
Right? Oops. Anyway, on Christmas Eve, suddenly the state government ordered their council to remove all the barriers, and people were just fuming. And yeah, they went in, they put their own barricades in. The new battle for Union Street, because Union Street was a battle during the Depression, right? And they called it out. And guess what? The closure issue could spread. Yeah.
How you put on this child's life? Ask Mr. Stewart that in his little cul-de-sac street in Canterbury where he lives.
Today, the people retaliated with the aid of an old car wreck, testing the patience of police as a tow truck stood ready to enforce the government's direction.
I reckon you all to move back off the footpath, off the street here onto the footpath, as this vehicle is an obstruction, it's an unlawful obstruction, and it must be removed. If the person is not complying with that, leave themselves liable to arrest.
And in nearby Redfern, the fight was just beginning. Road barriers dismantled on Tuesday were this morning replaced with wooden poles and metal stakes. Residents of Great Buckingham Street ensuring it will take more than the police to remove this obstruction.
Today, council workmen came to move the makeshift traffic barriers. The locals were hopping mad. Workers went ahead, then Wall arrived. He's the foreman. It was tricky for him. He's a local himself. He didn't like what he was doing.
We're only here to do a job.
Under your life, these road closures. You live here, I know you do.
I just can't stop the job back here. Well, I know it's a sack. That review's beginning.
Hitler just told people to do jobs and they did it. You won't get the sack, don't be stupid rands involved.
But Wall stuck to his guns. It was on with the job. Then along came Wall's superior. He was a gentleman. He tried to explain. No dice. The locals wouldn't budge. So he phoned the office. The instructions from above were to pull the men out. The residents had won. They politely removed the barrier signs from Wall's truck and stuck them back where they wanted them. That leaves one big question. Will the council try again to remove the do-it-yourself barriers?
That's primarily a matter for the police. Police have jurisdiction over the thoroughfares to ensure that they're able to traffic. If they order us to have them removed, order the residents, that'll have to be complied with.
We never intended to delegate authority to be given to a lot of dopey independent aldermen to run around saying, would you like your streets closed? And if you vote for me, I'll get your street closed.
Today they put their campaign to a meeting of almost 300 concerned locals. Politicians from both sides attended. Everyone agreed. The narrow streets of Erskineville should stay closed to through traffic. Local Labor member Andrew Revshorgi said he'll speak to Mr Stewart tomorrow to try to have the decision reversed.
I'd like to first say that I support road closures.
And Liberal leader Nick Griner said it wasn't a decision for state government anyhow.
You simply say to the ministers of the state government, and indeed to the state opposition, fight out. It isn't the job for state politicians. It isn't the job for the state government, be it Liberal or be it Labor.
The hypocrisy that even Labor go on
times rowdy. And for those who didn't agree with residents, like Upper House member Judith Walker, the response was hostile. It ended with almost unanimous agreement that closures remain, that representation speak to Mr Stewart, and that Premier Rann order the minister to revoke his decision.
With anarchy in the streets of Erskineville over his Christmas Eve order to tear down traffic barriers, local government minister Kevin Stewart searched for a compromise in a 30-minute huddle with Transport colleague Barry Unsworth. Finally, Mr Stewart had to mark the eve of his retirement from politics with a classic about-face. The barriers would go back up, pending a review of the whole question of suburban traffic management.
I haven't built it in the face of anything. What I have done is that I have brought the matter to a head. It was a matter of my judgment, and I would do it again, perhaps not at Christmas time.
Out at the front line, the so-called pro-street closure trendies greeted the news not as a reprieve, but total victory.
They have tried so hard to keep us down. The local party in this area thinks that it can get away with bloody blue murder. And they won't, and they didn't. And we'll beat them if they try it again.
As a forum for debate on municipal matters, the council chambers had probably seen rowdier sessions. But with the future of their controversial street closures at stake, the gallery of Erskineville Newtown residents wasn't exactly lacking in voice.
Please, can we silence and free speech to be exercised?
It was the sort of high emotion that residents expressed in no uncertain terms after the council was forced to remove over 10 roadblocks in the inner southern suburbs on Christmas Eve. This morning, for 1.5 hours, council members exhorted their support for street closures, voted to appoint the city engineer to a traffic authority review committee, but rejected a move by independent alderman Frank Sartor to fight the government's decision revoking council authority to set up roadblocks in future. The council also called for a report on important link roads to relieve traffic congestion, but angered residents by opposing their representation on the authorities committee.
It's just the appellation we have at standing and looking at a farce. They're a joke.
Alderman Sartor says the meeting accomplished very little, but he's confident the people's wishes will be upheld.
The government's not going to buy into this again, made a mistake, and I think that the residents will have their way.
Now, we are sick to death of this. It's a political issue. We all know where the pressure's been coming from. We all know that it has nothing to do with road closures per se.
A move to seek residents' representation on the working party failed, and Alderman Jack Mundy made his thoughts public about one of his fellow aldermen. Despite all the talk and interjections at this morning's special meeting, the Sydney City Council has no real say in road closures. That right rests firmly with the Traffic Authority of New South Wales, and it will be on its say-so whether the roads around Erskineville will be closed forever or will be reopened. The Traffic Authority is expected to hand its report to the Minister for Transport late next month.
Now, most of the road closures will not only be retained, but they'll be made permanent, while still allowing access to emergency vehicles. In some cases, speed humps and other measures will be taken
Great Buckingham
to
Street,
achieve
where
this
Sex
compromise.
Office was also part of the closures there.
Transport Minister Rod says the decision followed a traffic authority review that showed the closures had resulted in a reduction in traffic accidents, and that was something local residents had been claiming all along.
Governments are always influenced by people putting forward a point of view. The important thing for governments is when those points of view conflict, to try and resolve them.
Yeah, anyway, that's about it. Yeah, and there's all those other campaigns that some of them got the stories told, there's videos, some of them haven't been told. So yeah, hope to research them in the future.
Thank you.
I think you're going to have to break it up into a few parts in future. But we saw lots of different things here, a lot of things to think about. I'm not sure whether we've got much time for discussion because of the length of your presentation. But maybe it's better to kind of break up into informal, or do people want to have it can take another 10 minutes. It's getting pretty late, but what do you think? Some questions about, say, go for about 10 minutes or so? You happy? I mean your hands, really. If you're happy, nod your heads. Okay, we'll take about, yes?
Did you find anything on, because I didn't think Council Street, Warringah Junction, when the freeway came through, did you find anything on that?
Sorry, which place?
So there was a street called Council Street and Warringah Junction
in the middle of it, it had this place called Parlour, which was the first, like, holistic, support place for people who were coming out of the old psychiatric hospital.
Oh, right.
And the Sydney-Newcastle Freeway went through there, and we lost that street, had a community garden. The houses were like 8 years off National Trust listing. It was like.
So it's Council Street, Bondi Junction.
Yeah, there was action to try and stop the Sydney-Newcastle Freeway from through.
Right.
And there were squats down there as well. The anarchist squats had like solar power and windmills on the roof.
Well, that's another future chapter then.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
Just
Yes, Coral? Yeah, and then.
I was just, Bob Hawke was still sore about, his reputation. And he was a member of the Wills branch when I was living in Melbourne. And I was a member of the Wills branch. And I'd written an article about his role. That's when he was MP for Wills. Written about his role in the destruction of the BLF and the Greens band. So he came to the Wills branch of the Labor Party to have me, what do you call it, expelled from the Labor Party for writing this article about him. So,
And what happened?
Well, he couldn't do it. He wondered whether, Coral River was real or existed because that I was in his Wills branch and we written an article there to expose him and what he'd done.
Excellent. Very good.
Yes, interesting. Betty Mason, she actually lived up not far from me. But she was incredibly active, and of course, they met up at the Annandale Town Hall, the historic old town hall, and they met there and she linked up with a lot of the Labour Party people, and that's where a lot of the more radical Labour Party people emerged out of those meetings in the 60s and 70s. And the history of that is actually quite interesting, and Paul Greenland would know most of that.
Just wondering if you've done much research into this area around Ultimo PM?
Yeah, not really. It's just the Fig Street stuff is what I know about.
Is there like, was it Scott Street squats? I'll look it up and I'll let you know. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's some squats in Ultimo.
That Joanna Trainer thesis has a lot on the history of squats throughout that whole period. A lot of anarchists involved. Yeah, it's quite interesting.
And just another quick comment on squats, because again there was a whole pile of North Annandale was going to be demolished as part of that motorway thing, and all the houses there were squats. And then after it was lifted, the question became, because the DMR had bought the houses, and then they were going to sell them. So a lot of the people who were in the squats, I know some of them are still around, bought the houses at a really bargain price. Yeah, it was an interesting move. Yeah.
Excellent presentation, thank you for that. I'm not sure if you would want to include this in your already lengthy presentation, but there's a very radical history about the widening of the streets, particularly with the time of Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III. So Osman's reforms widened the streets of Paris, the main goal being to prevent the people who are revolutionaries from setting up barricades.
I've heard about Houseman,
Yeah. Might include that in the street widening.
Well, Paris is really changing very quickly now, in a really positive way. Yeah. In terms of urban planning, and New York, other cities.
No one else? Shall we just break up for an informal conversation then?
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
to
you.
Thank you. We've got a Trans Day of Invisibility tomorrow, I think. And there's Communities United Against Racism on April 6th in Bankstown, I think. And Safe Waterloo campaign. So, I mean, these strikes are continuing, right? April 12th, you can come down to Waterloo, 1 p.m. This is the Battle of Waterloo is happening here and now. It's not something we're going to be talking about in history. And this is a community which Rachel and others here have been doing a lot of organising work, and people are prepared to fight. They've been lied to over and over again, and now they've got, some of them have got eviction notices. And so the fight's really on.
And also some of that public housing is going to be privatised.
Well, the whole thing today, of course, is that, you know, they privatise it and they pretend that they're going to give you more affordable and social housing out of it. But actually it's mostly for the developers.
Yeah.
And it's really doubtful whether the people out there are ever going to get back into the area, because affordable is not really affordable to most of the people. So thanks very much for coming, and thanks Andrew.
Can I just make a final word? So this is my wrap up. Is resistance to car dependency has been broad, persistent and hard fought. Everyone from anarchists, squatters, unionists, communists and Trotskyists to the enlightened middle classes and resident action groups, from expert planners to children, straights, queers, black, brown and white, DJs, rock musicians, artists, from prime ministers to premiers, local councillors and residents, everyone can get involved. It doesn't mean an end to cars, it might just mean better cities and a better world for all of us. Thank you.
Tell us about this.
Yeah, well, I really accelerated the pace towards the end. Your workload's on, but just to get an intro, going to places, take photos, intro, you don't hear about this place anymore for various reasons. I enjoyed it. My employer probably counts. Like, what were you doing? Like, yeah. Sydney Unis. Thank you very much.
I was going to say maybe something about it, but in America they got rid of the trams by